Our next presenter hails from Charlotte, North Carolina. Mr. Tony Oxendine serves on the Board of Governors and is currently serving on the Executive Committee. He serves as the Vice Chair of the Music Producers Committee and will be presenting a very special CALLERLAB Award tonight. Please give a big hand for Tony Oxendine.
This is a tough one. I'm here tonight to present the CALLERLAB Milestone Award. The CALLERLAB Milestone, as you heard last night, is the highest award CALLERLAB can bestow on any individual. The nominee is judged against rigid criteria in 5 separate categories. The nominee must meet the criteria in all 5 categories to receive the award. The primary purpose of this award is to recognize those individuals, whether CALLERLAB members or not, who have made outstanding and significant contributions to the field of square dancing. This is often a difficult decision, for there are many outstanding people in our activity. The Milestone Award is presented to individuals who have met the following 5-point criteria in the field of square dancing and have been selected by the Executive Committee to be honored in this way. The vote by the Executive Committee must be 100% in favor of the award presentation. All 5 members must vote yes. 1 single negative vote and the milestone is not awarded. As you can guess, many, probably most, nominations are denied initially. With that in mind, the 5-point criteria are as follows. The recipient must have worked in uncharted fields. Number 2, the individual's contributions to the activity must have stood the test of time. Number 3, these contributions must have been unselfish. Number 4, in the course of making these contributions, the recipient must have displayed true leadership and professionalism. Finally, number 5, the recipient's work must have had a broad influence on the activity. Now, it's at this point in milestone presentations, when we start talking about the 5 criteria and how the recipient fulfills these criteria. So I may as well just take it out and I'll just tell you who it is now. Because I realize that part of everyone's fun is guessing who the recipient is by the vague clues in this presentation. Buddy did well on this last night. I knew who it was and I forgot who it was. Perhaps some of you have figured it out when you realized that I was the presenter. I can guarantee you that most of you will recognize this person as soon as I explain how this person has fulfilled the first criteria in uncharted fields. Now, if you've been under a rock for the last 50 years, then you may need to know how this recipient's contributions have stood the test of time. There still may be some of you that don't realize exactly how unselfish this recipient has been with both his knowledge and his talent. And as I divulge this person's identity, I also intend to explain this recipient's leadership and professionalism, both with our organization and in square dancing in general. Now, there may be still 1 or 2 of you who are in the dark about this recipient's activities. So let me tell you who it is. But before I do, you should know that this recipient has had probably the most broad influence of any caller in the modern era. Now, I noticed I promised to tell you the person's identity several minutes ago, but before I do, there's something you should know. I wasn't on the Executive Committee that approved this award almost 2 years ago. I was on the Executive Committee that received another well-thought-out recommendation and presentation for this recipient. This presentation was denied. Because it was already been presented and approved the year before. So Charlie Robertson, and Jet Roberts. I'm sorry. Hell, it was already done. So, wait a minute. I'll get through this. I owe you a big apology, Charlie. Now, I had to tell you that even though you laid out a really, really thoughtful and well laid out presentation, we had to deny it. You were just a little too late. So I guess by now, most of you have figured it out. And maybe since the third of the three amigos is here, my buddy Larry Letson is here tonight. And I had to lie to him too. I tried to get him to come to the convention, and I couldn't tell him why. So I called Teresa. I said, Teresa, can I please tell Larry who's getting this thing? She said, no, but let me call him. And she did, and my buddy Larry Letson is here. You see, if you can't guess by now, this recipient is very personal to me. And he was a very special person. Some might say he's the most gifted caller of modern times. Many would call him the GOAT. And there's probably much to be said for that. Personally, I and many other callers would say this guy was probably the most naturally talented caller of our time, and I probably knew him better than most, shy of his immediate family. In 2000, the CALLERLAB Board of Governors wisely removed the restriction against presenting this award posthumously. Since I'm sure you now guessed the recipient's name, it is my distinct honor and privilege to inform you that CALLERLAB's highest honor, the Milestone, goes to my buddy Jerry Story. Okay. I still got some more, and Teresa told me I had to do it in 15 minutes. Whew. Many of you only knew Jerry as the famous traveling professional caller and festival doer. There are others, which include, as best as I can count, many vice chairmen, many Board of Governors members, many Board of Governors chairmen, perhaps Ted's not one of these, many past and present executive committee members, record producers, many close friends, present company definitely included. Now, I may be leaving a few out, but most of us knew him from being on the receiving end of one of his blistering emails or phone calls. You know, but that was kind of Jerry's way of saying that he cared. So for those of you and for those people and for the rest of you, let me tell you a little more about him. Jerry was born June 21st, 1955 in Keokuk, Iowa, and his uncle Milo taught him to play guitar at the early age, around 7. Jerry was an apt student, and by the time he was 12, he was giving guitar lessons. Shortly afterwards, he formed a country western band where he played guitar and was the lead singer. Now, fortunately for the square dance world, Jerry's future was not determined to be in the country music field. Jerry's parents were both avid square dancers, and they dragged Jerry to lessons. Again, he was an apt student, and by the time he was 14, the calling bug bit him, and a future star was born. With his parents as his chauffeur, Jerry quickly started calling and teaching lessons for clubs in his immediate area. In 1972, 2 of his early students were Phil and Mary Laux. Phil and Mary just happened to have a cute little 14-year-old girl named Christy. So after they graduated, Phil and Mary allowed Jerry to ride his dirt bike on their farm, and on one of those rides, he saw Christy sit in her front yard. 17-year-old Jerry was love-struck, at least according to Christy. Jerry graduated from high school in 74. The two were married in 76. Later that year, their first son, Joshua, was born. For those of you that keep track of Royal Records, Josh was one of our first Patta records. Their second son, Jacob, who was also a Patta record, was born in 1981. After their first year of marriage, Jerry and Christy moved to Fairfield, Iowa, where Jerry went to work in the Laux family business, All-American Pest Control. Yep, ladies and gentlemen, Jerry's Story was a bug killer. As you can guess, with a wife and small child at home, expenses for the Story family were kind of tight. So their family car was the pest control station wagon, complete with 2 big magnetic signs on the front door. By now, Jerry's calling circle was getting a bit larger. He was calling dances all over Iowa, driving to them in his family car. He converted his work car to his family car by removing the magnetic signs prior to driving to the dance and putting them back on the next morning. By the late 70s and early 80s, Jerry's enthusiastic style and flowing choreography enabled him to start touring nationwide. Fortunately, by now, he could afford his own car, and he started his progression from bug killer to full-time professional square dance caller. By this time, Jerry had also begun to record for Chaparral Records on their subsidiary label, Roadrunner. Consequently, Jerry formed a group of road clubs throughout the Midwest he aptly called the Roadrunners. Right about now is where I came into the picture. I met Jerry in 1980 in Lancaster, Ohio. We did our first weekend together in that city in 1980. We rehearsed singing calls in this couple's kitchen all night long. And for about 8 hours, a couple of cases of Miller Lite, we came up with a bunch of show tunes that we used that weekend. And that weekend led to a lifetime friendship. In the years that followed, that one weekend morphed into over 30 annual weekends, week-long tours together, and Institute Square Dance Weeks scattered all over the world. Now, during this time, Jerry and I were on separate recording labels. He was on Rhythm Records, I was on Ranch House Records. For you younger callers from the young table, records are those things that kind of look like CDs. They're just a little darker, yeah. We were doing a lot of stuff together. It only seemed natural for us to start our own label. Since we were both full-time callers, we didn't have any money. So in 1985, we borrowed enough money from Christy's father to pay for a recording session and to pay for a full year's advertisement in both Square Dance magazines. So in the true definition of country come to town, we went to Nashville, hired 7 musicians, a studio, an engineer, and just slightly over 12 hours, recorded our first 6 tunes. That was the humble beginning of Royal Records. Now, 50 years later, with Christy as my new partner, Royal Records continues to produce square dance music, perhaps some of the best music in the world. Music that is performed by callers from all over the world. Now, right in the middle of all of this, Jerry got an offer to move to Mission, Texas to do a winter square dance program. Again, his charm and infectious personality, not to mention being a hell of a caller, quickly won over the dancers in the valley. The Peppermint Palace became the place to dance, and Jerry wound up doing multiple sessions throughout the week and then traveling out on weekends. There was a slight problem, and you see, popularity can be a scary thing. Now, bear in mind, this was before we had computers. We had computer cards. Vic hadn't even thought of computer programs by this time, I don't think. But the problem we had, because for many of Jerry's sessions, he had to use multiple sets of cards to use to accommodate the 40-plus squares he attracted every week, multiple times a week. Even being this busy, Jerry still found time to help form the local Callers Association in Mission. He was also instrumental in getting the Mission Chamber of Commerce to sponsor square dance lessons, and for many years, the combined class that all the callers did on Monday mornings attracted more than 50 squares. In 1997, Jerry, Christy, Larry Letson, and I met some local Charlotte square dancers, Evan and Virginia Curley. Name might ring a bell to some of you. That was the beginning of another lifetime's friendship. Sometimes it's amazing how things come together. Jerry and I at the time were doing a square dance week at Kirkwood Lodge with Marcia Flippo. We'd done week-long institutes at English Mountain in Tennessee, Coke Crest in Georgia, and in Örebro, Sweden. It was during this conversation about week-long institutes that Jerry came up with the idea of doing something similar in North Carolina. It was about this time Jerry and Christy bought a motorhome and discovered the full-time life of living in an RV. And Jerry, being a shrewd businessman that he was, came up with an idea: why not combine his love with RVing and his love of camping and his love of calling? So Jerry and Christy started searching for the right campground to make this happen, and in 2001, they came upon a campground in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. Larry Letson and I were invited in on the project, and that same year, the group of us purchased Pride RV Resort. Pride RV had an open-air pavilion that was simply perfect for square dancing. So Jerry went about setting up the Square Dance Weeks, featuring callers from all over the country. Jerry was the resident caller and would be there most weeks. After a few successful years, Everett decided to build another building that would serve as both a square dance hall and as an attractive venue for weddings and corporate meetings. And in 2007, the Pride Center was born. complete with custom sound, floating hardwood floor, and finally, air conditioning. At our inaugural dance in June of 2007, 22 Squares celebrated the park with us. And today, Jerry's dream, Maggie Valley Square Dance Vacation, is still successful and still entertains hundreds of square dancers annually. For the next 9 years, Jerry spent half of his year in South Texas and the other half at Pride. In 2016, Jerry decided to slow down. He retired from calling in South Texas. He moved back to Fairfield, Iowa, and opened up a bar. That's a scary thought. That's another time, though. The Hideaway quickly became the go-to place for Fairfield locals. I remember spending a week there with Larry and Jerry one night. All right. I'm trying to keep this as lighthearted as I can because it helps me keep my emotions relatively in check. If you look at the criteria, Jerry checks all 5 of these things. The first, must have worked in uncharted fields, is easy. In the early 80s, Jerry was one of the first, if not the very first, caller to call in Saudi Arabia. At the time, there were many European and Scandinavians working there for various companies. And at the same time, there were very few callers in Sweden and Denmark. Most of the dancers in Sweden and Denmark were taught not by callers, but by square dance instructors. Many of the Scandinavian dancers had really never danced to a real caller, other than on tape. So the Scandinavian dancers that were stationed in Saudi recorded Jerry's dances and took them back home. There, many of these dancers grew up dancing to Jerry's tapes. By the time I went to Sweden in the early 1980s, Robert, Ingvar, Stefan, Richard, and many of the others were already mimicking Jerry's enthusiastic calling. In the years that followed, Jerry's influence spread all over Europe as well as Scandinavia. Now, I may miss one or two, but Jerry has called in, I get this right, Canada, Mexico, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, Japan, Taiwan, Great Britain, Belgium, Australia, and Saudi Arabia. Now, the terms national and international caller are tossed around intermittently now. Jerry remains one of a handful of callers who are truly household names across the world. Now, I'm going to combine 2, 3, and 4 contributions that stood the test of time, contributions that were unselfish, and contributions that displayed true leadership and professionalism. Jerry single-handedly turned the world of caller education on his ear. No one had ever heard of crams until Jerry came up with it. He took relationship calling to a new level. Prior to Jerry and crams, caller coaches spoke very highly and knowledgeable about formation arrangements and sequence, but caller coaches never, ever, if they did, they sort of breezed over the term relationships whenever phaser was discussed. Surely none of us had ever tried it as a method of calling. Jerry was all about relationship calling. He eventually had callers all over the world talking about Dixie Grand lines, and I got yours, you got mine. Now, because of Jerry's story, you see relationship calling discussed in almost every caller school. Jerry spent untold hours teaching crams and promoting square dancing worldwide, more often than not for no fee. There are more than several callers in attendance here tonight that are beneficiaries of Jerry's wisdom. Jerry was always quick to volunteer for panels at CALLERLAB and at the National Square Dance Convention. He was chairman of the SSD committee and active on several other committees. He had also served several terms on the Board of Governors. And had it not been for Jerry, there would not be this new dance program we now have. Jerry was the first caller to promote sustainable square dance, which was the predecessor to social square dancing. Many of these sequences, Jerry called them poems, were published in several of the SSD documents courtesy of Jerry. Prior to Jerry, no one had ever called these things poems. There was no, and there still is no bigger proponent of SSD than Jerry Story. So to the many SSD programs worldwide, you owe Jerry a big thanks. Finally, we get to number 5. Now, this is the one that counts. It's the one with the sauce. The recipient's work must have a broad influence on the activity. Now, where did I start with this one? As a fellow caller and a professional caller, I honestly think that Jerry Story is probably one of the most influential callers we've had in the last 50 years. It's been said that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and Jerry is probably the most imitated caller in the history of square dancing. With that in mind, look around you. How many times have you heard "celebrate" at the end of a good get out? What about "super sweet"? What about walking? Or 4 girls promenade men, pick them up, spin around over your head? Or ladies chain 3.5 and courtesy turn, which he stole from me. I lovingly call these Jerryisms. Many of you would call it research. Regardless, it's something good, and if something is good, it sticks around, and these and other Jerryisms will be around long after most of us are in that great square dance hall in the sky. If you want further proof of this, Google Jerry Story square dance caller. I did, and came back with, anybody want to guess? 1,390,000 hits. That separates the men from the boys really quick. On a personal note, Jerry and I were best friends. But maybe best friends don't quite describe our relationship. We're pretty close. We're more like brothers. There were times we spent together more than we spent with our families. And there was always some kind of friendly competition between the two of us. And this competition made us better callers. Jerry forced me to become a better caller, and he made me realize that if I was going to share the stage with him, I better know what the hell I'm doing. I better be able to deliver the goods. A large portion of my calling career spent on the stage with this larger-than-life person, and calling with Jerry was always a fish or cut bait experience. But when the two of us together, it was something special. Many will say we are a hard act to beat. And had there not been a Jerry Story, it would not have been a Tony Oxendine. But he didn't just affect me. He affected many of us throughout, and his legacy will live on. He's looking down on us, and every time we celebrate at the end of a good sequence, every time we do a 4 boys promenade on the closer of a singing call, I got a feeling Jerry will be looking down. Yeah, Jerry could be abrasive, I reckon. And he truly had no time for fools. But underneath this harsh, brash exterior was a man whose passion for this activity was unparalleled. Truly, my friend and brother, Jerry Story, lived his life and his career by the credo, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. Sadly, Jerry passed away on December 19th, 2020. But in his 65 years on earth, he touched an untold number of people. And now, his passing will leave a hole in many of our lives, as well as leaving a gaping hole in an activity that will be impossible to fill. Sadly, Jerry can't be here to accept this award. But you're going to like this, Hunter. And you're going to say, Tony, thank you for putting me at my table. It gives me great pleasure and is my honor to present the CALLERLAB Milestone Award to the Story family. Would you please welcome Christy Story, his wife, Josh Story, and Jerry Story, his 2 sons. The Story family, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening. I got to say, I thought Jake and I were the only ones who got to enjoy those blue screen talks. My dad was no stranger to the microphone, standing on stage, talking in front of hundreds of people. My mother, however, is liable to lose her beautiful lunch if you put a microphone in front of her face. So she asked me to give a few thank yous on behalf of the family. First, thank you to Tony for the beautiful recap of my father's career. And thank you for being such a great friend to our family all these years. Second, thank you to the CALLERLAB Executive Committee for inviting our family to be here tonight and accept this prestigious award for my father. Thank you to everybody in attendance here this evening. I see some familiar faces in the crowd. Letson, I know you're out there, buddy. Can't wait to catch up with you. Last, and certainly not least, thank you to all the callers who will continue to carry the good torch and grow this activity that my father loved so much. Thank you, guys.